What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Not a Movie Buff. If you're still here after episode 1, then you're officially part of the club, the people who love movies, but don't need to sound like a film professor to talk about them. And if this is your first time tuning in, don't worry. This is the most laid-back movie talk you're gonna find. Now, let's be honest for a second. Not every movie hits. Some of them miss so badly, you start checking your watch halfway through the first act. But here's the funny thing. A lot of the movies that we call bad are still the ones that we can't stop watching. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Those movies that are ridiculous, over the top, sometimes they're just straight up stupid. But somehow you've seen them like 5 times. They make you laugh even when you don't want to admit it. You'll be sitting there, you talk about how trash it is, but you're quoting lines from it word for word. And that's when you realize bad, it doesn't always mean forgettable. I think that's why I have a little bit of a soft spot for so-called bad movies. They're messy for sure, but they're also fearless. They try things most safe movies would never risk. They swing big, and sometimes, yeah, they strike out hard, but at least they swung. So that's what I want to explore today. I want to explore the lessons hiding inside the chaos, because underneath the cringe, the plot holes, the wild acting choices, a lot of these movies, they still have something real to say. You just have to be willing to look past the mess long enough to find it. And really, that's the beauty of movies like that. They remind us that effort still matters, even when it doesn't land perfectly. So grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's talk about a few movies that critics might have laughed at, but somehow we still remember and maybe even learn something from. There's a fine line between dumb comedy and smart stupidity. And Little Man, it walks that line like it owns the place. It's one of those movies that critics hated before the opening credits were even over. But for a lot of us who actually watched it, we didn't see a disaster. We saw a comedy team so committed to a wild idea that it somehow worked. The concept, it's ridiculous. A grown man, Calvin, played by Marlon Wayans, disguises himself as a baby to steal a diamond. That's the plot. There's no hidden meaning, no deep symbolism, just chaos. It's dedicated chaos. From the very first scene, that chase sequence with Calvin sliding under cars, getting smacked by doors, and diving through windows, you already know exactly what kind of movie this is. And the Wayans don't just wink at the audience, they double down. They're saying, yeah, this is absurd, but we're all in. See, that commitment, that's what makes Little Man work when it shouldn't. You've got to respect a team that looks at an idea that's stupid and says, let's go harder. The CGI might not have aged well. Well, okay, it didn't age well at all. But the physical comedy is still hits because it's rooted in performance, not pixels. Marlon Wayans, he sells every expression like he's competing for an Olympic medal in facial acting. Shawn Wayans plays the straight man perfectly, the responsible older brother just trying to hold his life together while madness unfolds around him. And then you've got Kerry Washington grounding the whole thing. She plays her role with sincerity, even while holding a grown man in diapers. See, that's what separates Little Man from being a throwaway gimmick movie. It knows what it is. It's not pretending to be smarter than it is, but it's also not lazy. You can feel the effort in every bit, the timing, the slapstick, the pacing. There's a scene where Calvin, disguised as the baby, is getting his diaper changed. And the expression on everyone's face during that sequence says everything about why this movie works. They're disgusted, they're confused, and they're still giving it 110%. And that's the lesson here. Effort sells the impossible. When a cast commits, the audience buys in, even if the idea is nuts. Critics love to call Little Man stupid, but it's intentionally stupid. It's not trying to be high art, it's trying to be funny, and it succeeds more often than it gets credit for. Because funny is about rhythm and confidence, and that's what the Wayans do best. And here's what I take from Little Man. If you're going to chase a ridiculous idea, chase it with everything you've got. Half-hearted creativity never leaves a mark, but a fully committed, borderline insane idea, that's the stuff that ends up being remembered. So, yeah, it's a dumb premise, but it's brilliant execution because they believed in it. And that's why, even all these years later, people still talk about Little Man. They might laugh at it, but deep down, they're laughing with it too. So if Little Man was the definition of fully committed to chaos, then Norbit is what happens when you take that same energy and crank the dial until it breaks. Where Little Man made you laugh because it knew how ridiculous it was, Norbit doubled down on that idea. It wasn't just dumb fun, it was deliberately fearless. And whether you love it or hate it, you have to admit Norbit is unforgettable. When people talk about it, they usually start with the obvious. Eddie Murphy playing three major roles: Norbit, Rasputia, and Mr. Wong. And he didn't half step on any of them. He went full Eddie Murphy the same way he did in the Nutty Professor movies, where he played an entire dinner table of characters and somehow made each one distinct. That's rare commitment. But here's where it gets interesting. Norbit, it's one of those movies that it walked right into controversy because of how far it pushed comedy boundaries. Critics hated it. They said it was mean-spirited, offensive, immature, and to some, that may be fair. But here's the thing. Norbit was hilarious to a lot of people, including me. It was exaggerated, yeah, sure, but it reflected that loud, outrageous humor that dominated the early 2000s comedies. And it was the kind of movie that made you laugh and then say, I really can't believe they just did that. You know, you can't talk about Norbit without mentioning Rasputia. That character is the movie. From the moment she says her iconic line, "How you doing?" You know exactly who she is. Loud, confident, unapologetic, and terrifying. She's a villain, but she's also magnificent. And it's not because the character is likable, it's because Eddie Murphy goes all in. He doesn't wink at the camera or soften it. He plays Rasputia like she's real, like she believes she's the star of the movie. And that's why people still quote her today. There's a fine line between offensive and authentic, and Norbit, it tiptoes right across it. You can call it problematic, but you can't call it lazy. It's a movie made with too much energy, not too little. And that's the thing. I'd rather watch a film that takes a swing, even if it misses, than one that plays it safe and disappears from memory. Because Norbit, for me, it didn't disappear. You still hear people randomly yell it, "How you doing?" Or quote Mr. Wong's ridiculous lines like, "You people make me sick." And somehow everyone knows what you're referencing. It's staying power. But underneath all the noise, there's something that you can actually learn from Norbit. It's about creative confidence, believing in your own comedic voice, even when the world calls it stupid. Eddie Murphy didn't chase approval, he chased what he thought was funny. And while critics tore him apart, the movie still found its audience. I mean, it made over $160 million worldwide. That's not failure. It's proof that connection doesn't always come from polish. Sometimes it comes from audacity. Was Norbit perfect? Nah, not even close. But it's a movie made with conviction, with that this might not work, but I'm going to do it anyways. It's funny to me. It's that type of energy. That's the kind of risk taking that Hollywood barely lets happen anymore, honestly. The lesson with Norbit is that sometimes you have to be willing to bomb. And that's not to say that Eddie Murphy went into this movie with that mindset like, oh, okay, I want to fail. No, you don't want to fail, but you want to be fearless because that's the only way that you'll ever make something unforgettable. And love it or hate it, Norbit is unforgettable. It's the kind of movie that you quote, you argue about, you secretly laugh at when it comes on TV, even if you pretend you don't. And that's what ties it to Little Man. Both movies said, we know what we are, and we're not apologizing for it. They own their ridiculousness, and that's exactly what makes them memorable. Now, after the wild world of Norbit, let's go a little more grounded when it comes to the next movie, Lottery Ticket. It's not a movie that relied on CGI, slapstick, wild transformations. It's really a straightforward story about luck, greed, and community. And even though the critics didn't love it, it's one of those movies that still finds its way back into weekend cable rotations for a reason. It's familiar, but that's exactly why it works. The setup's simple. Kevin Carson, played by Bow Wow, wins $370 million on the 4th of July weekend, but the lottery office is closed until Monday. So he's got to survive 3 long days in the same neighborhood where everybody suddenly knows he's holding the golden ticket. It's funny, but it's also painfully real. That's the beauty of Lottery Ticket. It's not a perfect movie. It's predictable, and it wears this message on its sleeve, but it knows its audience. It speaks to that tension that we've all felt before. When something good happens to you, suddenly everybody wants a piece of it. There's this line early in the film where Kevin's grandmother, played by the phenomenally legendary Loretta Devine, she tells him, "Baby, money don't change who you are. It just shows people who they've been all along." The line, as deep as it is true. And that's where the movie finds its weight. We laugh when the neighbors start showing up pretending to be Kevin's friends. We shake our heads when his best friend starts getting jealous. And we roll our eyes when the girl who never paid him attention suddenly calls him baby. But through all that, you can see something deeper. Lottery Ticket isn't just about luck, it's about exposure. Money, it doesn't change people, it exposes them. It pulls the mask off. One of the best scenes in the movie is when Kevin starts realizing that all the fake smiles and empty promises around him are just people trying to cash in on his success. It's not subtle, but it's relatable. That's something you don't need a big studio budget to understand, just a little life experience. And that's what critics missed about Lottery Ticket. They called it too simple, too safe, too predictable. But simple doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes a movie connects because it's direct, because it's saying something you already knew but needed to hear again. The comedy works because it's grounded in something real. Mike Epps shows up as the flashy wannabe business partner. Terry Crews plays the "you ain't getting past me" security guy. Both of them add layers of humor that feel familiar, like people you've actually met. And that's where this movie quietly shines. You don't need to suspend disbelief. You just need to recognize it. The takeaway here? Sincerity beats complexity. We get so caught up trying to make things big, smart, or original that we forget being true is enough. And that's what Lottery Ticket nails. It's not the flashiest comedy. It's not a cinematic masterpiece. But it's one of those movies that you throw on randomly and end up watching the whole thing because it feels good. Because it reminds you that success without character, it means nothing. And maybe that's the point. Maybe we don't need every movie to challenge our intellect. Sometimes we just need one that reminds us what matters. A Lottery Ticket, it doesn't reinvent storytelling. It just tells a story that feels like real life. Again, sometimes that's all you need. So, we've talked about grounded comedy with Lottery Ticket. Let's swing back to something a little louder. The kind of movie that's pure nonsense on paper, but still manages to stick the landing. The Waterboy. Now, when people talk about stupid movies that still work, this one is Exhibit A. You could summarize it in one sentence. A socially awkward water boy discovers he can tackle like a freight train. And you'd be right. But what makes the water boy stand out isn't the plot. It's the heart behind the chaos. Adam Sandler plays Bobby Boucher with this childlike sincerity that could have easily been a caricature. He's shy, he's awkward, he stutters through conversations, but there's something lovable about how genuinely kind he is. He's not trying to be funny, and that's why it is funny. It's not mean-spirited, it's innocent in the weirdest way. And then you get that line, probably the most quoted line from the movie, "You can do it!" That line has lived way beyond the film itself. It's become a universal inside joke, a cheer, a meme. People yell it during workouts, sports games, even at graduations. That's the kind of cultural staying power that the Waterboy has. But here's what I think people forget. Underneath all the silliness is a story about finding confidence in what makes you different. Everyone in Bobby's life underestimates him. His mom, his teammates, his coaches. But he turns the real thing people mocked him for into his strength. That's real character growth wrapped in football pads and slapstick humor. And there's a deeper charm in how the movie never apologizes for being ridiculous. The football scenes are shot like wrestling matches. The sound effects are exaggerated. Kathy Bates, playing Mama Boucher, is over-the-top perfection. She sells every line like she's in a Southern soap opera. And Henry Winkler as Coach Klein, the perfect balance of clueless and heartfelt. The thing is, the Waterboy knows exactly what it's doing. It's self-aware, but it doesn't stop to point and laugh at itself. It just lets you enjoy the ride. That's why it works, because it's not cynical. It's goofy, but never fake. That's a huge part of why Adam Sandler's comedies, especially from that era, connected with people. They weren't trying to win Oscars, they were trying to make you laugh and remind you that everyone deserves a shot at being great. If you look past the dumb jokes, there's actually a lot of honesty in there. When Bobby finally stands up to his mom and goes back to play football, that's a moment everyone can relate to. Not because of sports, but because we've all had to step out of someone else's shadow at some point. It's that balance of absurdity and sincerity that gives the movie its lasting power. People might quote the funny parts, but they remember the feeling of watching someone who didn't believe in himself finally win. And that's why this stupid comedy hits harder than it should. So yeah, it's wild, it's ridiculous, it's full of weird accents and one-liners, but it's also kind of inspiring. That's the lesson that the Waterboy teaches. You can laugh at something and still learn from it. Because sometimes the dumbest stories, they have the smartest hearts. Plain and simple. So far, we've talked about movies that have made people laugh, even when critics didn't. So I want to move on to a movie that it tried to make people feel, and it did succeed, but it tripped over its own web a few times along the way. I'm talking about The Amazing Spider-Man 2. If there's ever been a movie that proves emotion can outshine structure, it's this one. Yeah, it's flawed 100%. It is for sure one of the most overstuffed superhero movies ever made, but it's also one of the most human. Andrew Garfield's version of Peter Parker, he didn't have the same awkward, nerdy energy as Tobey Maguire's or the witty confidence of Tom Holland's. He was a different kind of Spider-Man. He was emotional, conflicted, painfully sincere. And that sincerity is what carries this movie. Now, being 100% honest here, the plot is a mess. You've got Electro, Green Goblin, secret subway layers, hidden Oscorp conspiracies. It's like 5 movies fighting for attention in one. But even through all that chaos, the heart of the story, Peter's relationship with Gwen Stacy, that's what gives it weight. That rooftop scene where they talk about her future in London, it's real chemistry. You can feel that. And when he says, "You're my path," you believe it. Even if you already know that it's going to end in heartbreak. We get to the clock tower scene, the one that I guarantee everyone remembers. The web snapping toward her, the silence when it connects, that small thud when her head hits the ground. It's brutal. And you don't need a critic to tell you that the moment lands, because for a superhero movie, it's not about saving the day. At least in this aspect, it was about failing. That's something that hadn't been done a lot in superhero movies at the time, and it's something that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 did differently. It let the hero lose, and it didn't sugarcoat it. Andrew Garfield's reaction after Gwen's death is one of the most raw performances ever seen in a comic book film. He doesn't scream, he doesn't monologue, he just breaks down quietly, holding her body like he can't process what just happened, and it's gut-wrenching. Even though the rest of the movie jumps between tonal extremes, goofy villains 1 minute, tragedy the next, that scene alone, it's cinema. Now, the crazy thing about the movie is that it was supposed to launch an entire universe. They were setting up Sinister Six, teasing sequels, hinting at a bigger world, but in trying to expand, it forgot how to breathe. It's really why it doesn't flow as cleanly as it could have, because here's the thing. Ambition, it isn't the enemy. The movie wanted to be more than just another Spider-Man film. It wanted to show the emotional toll of being a hero. And even though it did get tangled up in too many subplots, it nailed the emotional core. You still hear people quoting it, especially those lighter moments that balance out all the tragedy. Like when Spider-Man is fighting Electro in Times Square, he says, "You're not a nobody, you're somebody." Now, it's cheesy, sure, but it's pure Spider-Man. He finds empathy even for the guy trying to fry him alive. It's what Andrew Garfield nailed. He had that sense of humanity even underneath the mask. He wasn't just cracking jokes for laughs. He was trying to reach people, even his enemies. And years later, when he appeared in No Way Home, the love he got from audiences proved it. Time just needed to catch up to his version. Because for all its flaws, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, again, it did something that not a lot of superheroes at the time did. It made you feel. So what was the lesson? You can fix structure, you can fix pacing, you can fix effects, but as long as you're sincere, you can't fake heart. And that's why this movie, despite how messy it was, it stuck with people. It wasn't the cleanest web ever spun. It's one that connected. And that's what storytelling is really about. Now, if The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was a movie that tripped over its own emotions, Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice is what happens when a movie tries to sprint before it learns how to walk. I respect ambition. I do. But this movie is my second least favorite superhero movie of all time. And I really did want to love it. I promise. You had both Batman and Superman, two of the most iconic characters in comic book history, finally facing off on screen. It should have been legendary. But instead, it ended up being one of the most confusingly boring blockbusters ever made. The movie, it had all the ingredients for greatness. You had Ben Affleck as a brutal, older Batman, Henry Cavill continuing his grounded, stoic take on Superman, and a setup that could have been the foundation for a cinematic universe. But all we got was a 2.5 hour trailer for 10 other movies. From the start, it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. It's part revenge story, part political thriller, part spiritual drama, and somehow it still tries to be a sequel to Man of Steel and a setup for Justice League. And because it's trying to juggle all of those tones, it ends up dropping the ball on all of them. The pacing is rough. You've got dream sequences, flashbacks, visions of the future, and cameos from characters the story doesn't have time to earn. Lex Luthor's there doing whatever Zack Snyder wrote he was doing. Jesse Eisenberg, he gave the kind of performance that it really makes you wonder if anyone ever told him that he was in the Batman and the Superman movie. And really, when you think that, okay, it might be getting a little bit better, we get Doomsday. And I really don't even know where to start with that because I say Doomsday very loosely. It looked like one of those horrible old school random creature generators that you find on an early 2000s website. And they say, yeah, that's fine. He wasn't threatening. He was just loud. He was messy. The entire third act turned into some kind of CGI light show. And again, this is all loosely because it's very dark still. Even with all the flashing lights, it's still a very dark scene, the entire third act, that's supposed to feel epic, but it ends up feeling empty. You have lightning bolts, you have explosions, you have dramatic music, but there's no emotion behind it. The frustrating part is that it really didn't even have to be this way because buried underneath all the noise, there were great performances. Ben Affleck, he was easily, for me, one of my favorite on-screen Batman ever. You can see the trauma and the rage behind his eyes, that sense of a man who's lost too much and he doesn't really trust anyone anymore. And Henry Cavill's Superman, still solid. He brought that same quiet dignity he had in Man of Steel. And for the movie, the problem, it wasn't the characters. It was the story they were stuck in. And then you have that one infamous scene, the one that everyone always talks about. Save Martha. I get what they were going for. It was supposed to be about empathy. It was supposed to be about Batman realizing Superman's humanity. But the way that it played out on screen, it just felt forced. It was awkward and it turned it into a punchline. And it's not that the idea was bad. It's just that it wasn't earned. That's the word that defines Batman versus Superman for me, unearned. It wanted the weight of The Dark Knight and the emotion of Man of Steel, but it didn't put in the groundwork to earn either one. It felt like a movie in a rush, desperate to build some type of universe instead of just telling a story. The irony is, when the movie slows down, like when Bruce is walking through the ruins during the Metropolis attack flashback, or that haunting shot of Superman saving people from the flood while the crowd reaches up like he's a god, it actually works. Those moments show flashes of brilliance. They make you think, oh yeah, this could have been special. But then it drowns itself again in exposition and setup. It's like watching someone try to play chess while juggling grenades. You want to admire the skill, but you're mostly waiting for something to blow up. Still, I have to give credit where credit's due. Ben Affleck's Batman was great. I loved watching him. I enjoyed him. That is one of the shining moments from the movie for me. And I was excited for that solo film until he dropped out. Cavill Superman remains one of my favorite of the live actions as well. But the thing is, in the DCEU, he was trapped in stories that didn't know how to use him. That's the frustrating part, that there was greatness, but it got buried. It didn't get any room to breathe. That's another thing that Superman can teach you as a viewer, that ambition without direction is chaos. It's not enough to dream big. You've got to know where you're going with it. Because when the story tries to do everything, it ends up doing nothing well. You can feel the effort, you can see the potential, but it's like watching someone draw the outline of a masterpiece and never fill it in. I didn't hate Batman vs. Superman because it was lazy. I hated it because it could have been amazing, and it wasn't. It had every tool in the book. It had every tool in the box. Great actors, great visuals, and the weight of two mythic characters. But it forgot to tell a story worth caring about. And in the end, all that buildup, all that drama, all those heavy-handed speeches just led to a monster that looked like a leftover from Lord of the Rings. Ambition is a good thing, but if you're not careful, it'll outrun your execution. And that's exactly what happened here. When you look at all these movies side by side, it's easy to call them bad. But when you slow down and really think about them, you start to see something different, a pattern, not a failure, but a fearlessness. Because every single one of them, for all their flaws, tried something bold. Little Man and Norbit, they weren't afraid to look ridiculous. They knew they'd get roasted, and they did it anyway. Lottery Ticket kept it simple when everything else in Hollywood was trying to outsmart itself. The Waterboy, pure nonsense that somehow turned into a message about believing in yourself. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 swung for emotional depth when it could have just coasted on action scenes. And Batman vs. Superman, for all of its pacing issues and chaos, it did try to make superhero cinema feel mythic. So I can respect that. Effort like that, it takes guts. It's easy to make something safe. It's easy to copy what already works, but it's hard to take a swing big enough that people might laugh at you. That's really the bigger picture here. These bad movies, they're a mirror. They show us how creativity actually works. It's messy, it's inconsistent, unpredictable, but always driven by someone who cared enough to try. That's the part people forget when they talk about movies like these. They weren't made by lazy people who didn't care. They were made by people who did care, maybe too much at times, but they just couldn't quite land it. You can feel the effort, though. And that's why I'll always find something to appreciate in movies like this. Not because they're perfect, but because they remind me that perfection's overrated. The heart behind the work, that's what sticks. When I talk about these movies, I'm not just talking about filmmaking. I'm talking about creating anything. Because every one of these films, whether it's wild, weird, or straight up broken, they carry the same lesson every creative person has to learn. You're gonna miss sometimes. And that's the truth we don't like to admit. We want everything we make to be great, whether it's a video, a song, a podcast episode, whatever. The reality is, not everything you make is going to land. And honestly, that's fine. Because you can't learn anything from the stuff that goes perfectly. You learn from the ones that fall flat. You learn from the times you thought, that's going to kill, and then it barely gets a reaction. That's what these bad movies remind me of. They're not failures, they're attempts. Sometimes wild, sometimes misguided, but always attempts at something bigger than playing it safe. Think about Little Man, creative fearlessness. Eddie Murphy and Norbit, creative ownership. The Waterboy, joyful commitment to an idea everyone thought was dumb. Even Batman vs. Superman, for all of his flaws, is proof that sometimes ambition gets messy, but at least there was ambition. As someone who creates, I get that. You pour yourself into something, and then the world reacts however it wants. That's the deal. But the effort, the time, the care, that's the part that people don't see. And that's what connects me to these movies. Because in a way, they're all reminders that the process is where the meaning really lives. You might miss the mark, you might get clowned for it, but you showed up and created something that didn't exist before. And that's always worth respecting. So yeah, this episode isn't just about bad movies. It's about the creators behind them, the people who took the shot. Because whether you're behind a camera, a mic, or a desk trying to build something from scratch, it all comes down to the same thing. You've got to be willing to make something imperfect. That's what keeps creativity alive, the willingness to look a little stupid while chasing something that matters to you. At the end of the day, movies don't have to be perfect to matter. They just have to try. That's why we remember the messy ones. They stick with us. They make us laugh. They make us cringe. Sometimes they even make us think harder than the ones that get all the praise. So yeah, some of these movies were disasters, but they were disasters made with passion. And I'll take that any day over something polished but empty. Next Thursday, we're switching gears a little bit. We're talking about fan made movies, rewrites, and projects that prove sometimes the best stories come from the people who love them the most. That's episode 3, When Fans Take Over: How Fan Content Keeps Stories Alive. That one is definitely going to be a fun one. But until then, I'm not a movie buff, but I'll see you at the movies.